The reason why lactulose takes up to 48 hours for it to work it. Lactulose itself is not osmotically active. So it has to be converted to the osmotically active substance or ions. So when you take in lactulose, it has to be breaking down, it has to be fermented by the bacteria in our GI intestine into the osmotically active acid like acetic acid. And that breakdown or that fermentation takes time to happen. We are back to our series on Dr. Leon's channel. We'll continue with our laxatives and purgatives. And in this video, we are going to talk more about osmotic laxative, how they work, and some examples and some useful information for healthcare professionals, for students, and for our patients. My name is Dr. Leon. All right, let's go. They are usually poorly absorbed ions like magnesium. So the medication contains either a poorly absorbed ions or poorly absorbed carbohydrates like lactulose. Lactulose is a disaccharide and it's made up of two sugar units, a disaccharide which is fructose plus galactose. So it's a semi-synthetic carbohydrate or disaccharide made up of glucose and galactose and fructose. It's poorly absorbable. So when you're taking the medication, this will happen. They stay in the lumen. They are trapped in the lumen, and then as osmotic laxative, they draw water. They draw water from the blood into the intestine. So they stay in the lumen, and they draw water into the intestine. And when that happens, the water will first of all soften the stool. It will make the stool soft. It will also increase the volume of the stool. And when there is increase in volume of the stool, this stimulates the GI motility. It will stimulate the GI motility. It will stimulate the intestine to contract, to promote bowel movement so that you can free your bowels. Aside being poorly absorbed ions or carbohydrates, they can also come as polymers, poorly absorbed polymers like polyethylene glycol, the short form PEG. So let's use this diagram to explain the mechanism of action. If these are the ions or the carbohydrates or the polymers, they are not absorbed. They will stay in the lumen. When you take in the medication, they can't be absorbed into the blood, so they stay in the lumen. And then by osmosis, they draw water to it. So by osmosis, they will draw water from the blood into the intestine. And this water will mix and soften the stool or the fecal residue. And when this happens, they increase the volume of the stool. And this will stimulate the GI intestine to contract to bring about the bowel movement. The things that you have to know about osmotic laxative. So first of all, we'll consider two major examples of osmotic laxative. That's lactulose. As I said, is a disaccharide made up of fructose and galactose. The magnesium in milk of magnesia or magnesium trisilicates. These are common products containing magnesium. And this contains the poorly absorbable magnesium ion. So the first thing that we have to know is about the onset. Osmotic laxative, most of them, they have quick onset, and with that, we normally use it for a rapid relief. Their onset can start from anywhere within 30 minutes to 3 hours. So 30 minutes to 3 hours, they will start to work. But lactulose, even though it's an osmotic laxative, lactulose actually takes a longer time for it to work. It will take up to like 48 to like 72 hours. So you have to make your patient aware that he or she should continue with the medication, because the medication will take about 2 to 3 days for it to work. And what's the reason? The reason why lactulose takes up to 48 hours for it to work is lactulose itself is not osmotically active. So it has to be converted to the osmotically active substance or ions. So when you take in lactulose, it has to be breaking down, it has to be fermented by the bacteria in our GI intestine into the osmotically active acid like acetic acid. And that breakdown or that fermentation takes time to happen. That's why lactulose usually takes up to like 48 hours for it to take effect, because it has to be fermented to the osmotically active acid. So even though almost all of the osmotic laxatives, especially the magnesium containing ones, they produce quick relief, 30 minutes to 3 hours, they are working. But lactulose, as I said, because there is the need for it to be fermented into the osmotically active acid, it takes up to at least 48 hours to work. So there is the need to advise your patients, wait, take your medication consistently and wait to see the effect. Don't stop taking the medication. 2, with magnesium, we also find magnesium useful in antacid medication. So the amount of magnesium that usually produce a laxative effect is about 0.2 gram to 1.2 gram this way. So some patients might have a laxative effect with magnesium at a low amount, around 0.2 gram, and some you would need a greater amount of the magnesium to produce the laxative effect. But all the same, that's the range that usually produces the laxative effect. Do you remember we said the bulk forming laxative are not useful in opioid-induced constipation because that's what I said. The opioid-induced constipation, there's an opioid sitting on the mu receptors, preventing the GI intestine to contract. Osmotic laxative, however, are very much preferred in opioid-induced constipation. In fact, we can use them together with the stimulants. And as I said with the mechanism, they draw water into the intestine and they soften the stool. So they, aside stimulating the GI motility, they soften the stool, and their ability to soften the stool will make it easy for you to pass the stool. So you can actually use them with stimulants. Using them with stimulants is the osmotic laxative will soften the stool, and the stimulant will now stimulate the GI motility so that you can easily pass the stool. So it's osmotic laxative is one of the preferred laxative in opioid-induced constipation. Number 4, lactulose is usually preferred in chronic constipation because it's safe. It's rarely absorbed. It's very safe. It is even used in individuals with hepatic encephalopathy. And as we said, lactulose, it takes up to like 2 days or 3 days for its effect to be seen. With magnesium, they produce rapid relief. As I said, their onset is from 30 minutes to 3 hours. They are quick. So if you need a quick relief of constipation, they are one of the medications that you have to go to. But you can't use the magnesium containing laxative for a long period of time or regularly, because magnesium, even though we are saying they are poorly absorbed, but some of the ions are absorbed, and using it for a long period of time can actually harm our kidneys. That's why they are not usually used chronically, unlike lactulose. Also, pregnancy, lactulose, magnesium are usually, or they are actually safe in pregnancy. So aside bulk forming laxative, we can also make use of lactulose or magnesium containing laxative in pregnancy. Then age. In terms of age, which group of people in terms of age can we use lactulose and the magnesium containing antacid? For magnesium hydroxide, the BNF recommended its use in 3 years and above. So a child of 3 years and above, including adults. Lactulose, the BNF recommended its use from 1 month old and above. So we can use it in kids or babies, 1 month old and above, also in adults. Yes, they are usually the second choice for most constipation. So for most constipation, which is not actually opioid induced constipation, your first choice is usually the bulk forming laxative, or you advise the patient to take in a lot of fiber diet, increase the fluid intake 2 liters to 3 liters at least in a day, exercise. And when all these are not helping, your second choice is to bring in the osmotic laxative so that they can soften the stool as well as stimulate GI motility. So magnesium or lactulose can be employed in most constipation as a second choice. But in opioid-induced constipation, as I said, the bulk forming laxative, we avoid them. So the osmotic laxative can actually be a first choice in opioid-induced constipation, and they can also be used with stimulants, which we'll talk about in our next video. Thank you, I'm Dr. Leon. This brings the end to our series on osmotic laxative. We'll continue in the next video on stimulant laxative.